The Flames are officially eliminated from playoff contention, but they are still giving us plenty to talk about.
You're Locked On Flames, your daily podcast on the Calgary Flames. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's episode of Locked On Flames. As always, I am your host, Jess Belmosto. I am back from the IR, and Nick is also here with me today. Thank you so much for holding it down this week. Nick, how are you doing?
I took a nap in the car on the way home, so I have a little more energy than usual for 6 o'clock on a weeknight.
Honestly, there's nothing better than an unexpected car ride nap. Except listening to today's episode of Locked On Flames, where we will be discussing Oliver Kylington's Masterton Trophy nomination, as well as the Flames being eliminated and what's going on with Pospisil and Connor Zary. But make sure you're subscribed to Locked On Flames wherever you get your podcasts, as well as YouTube, and we will be here for you Monday through Friday, 5 days a week, your team every day. So the Masterton Trophy Award nominees came out today. For those of you who don't know, it is one player from every team gets nominated because they exemplify resilience and sportsmanship, and basically it usually goes to an old guy, but not this time.
It depends. There was the year Jágr did win the Masterton Trophy just for being old. He was like 42. He finished like 6th or 7th in Hart Trophy voting. I believe that was the year he was with the Panthers, where he had a really good season for somebody who was like 41 years old. But a lot of the time we're talking about guys who've dealt with serious stuff, whether it be substance abuse, mental health, a loss of a family member. These are typically guys who show a dedication to the game that goes above what you would expect someone to do. A normal person would need a lot more time to deal with, to process, to go through what they're going through. And you look at some of the nominees, like Oliver Ekman-Larsson's just the nominee for the Panthers because he went from being bad to good. There was nothing extenuating there. He was bought out by the Canucks, and he went to the Panthers to kind of get an opportunity to restart his career. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you could talk about a guy like Marco Rossi, who got diagnosed with myocarditis, missed an entire calendar year where he wasn't allowed to exercise at all because of complications from getting COVID prior to the vaccine being widely distributed. So we're dealing with all types of people. And as for Kylington, we talked about this a lot during the buildup when he was first going to come back, when he was skating with the Wranglers, when he was getting ready to kind of ramp back up for the NHL. It's a reminder why you love hockey. Guys who are willing to put that work in, who want to be part of the team. The Flames did the right thing by giving him a contract, whether or not he was going to come back over. They gave him all the room he needed to kind of deal with what he was dealing with, to work on what was bothering him and preventing him from being able to play. And now we get to worry about the hockey player, which is always the end goal at the end of the day. When we only have to talk about hockey, we don't have to talk about extenuating circumstances, especially ones like this that are just purely unfortunate. That's what you want to do always.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing that I read today from Salim Valji in his article after talking with Kylington and the organization is that the Flames, we knew that they were helpful and assisted him in this, but even when he had a setback at the start of, I guess, towards the end of training camp, they were still willing to help him and get him set up with the resources. And we hear a lot of stories from former players that are like, yeah, no, they put me on LTIR, or I went into the players assistance program and I didn't hear from them.
It's complicated. All of this stuff, especially when you're dealing with sensitive topics like mental health, like substance issues, you want to be respectful of everybody involved. You don't want to speculate. You want to give people the room that if they want to come forward, like Kylington has been willing to do, to kind of empower other people who might be dealing with stuff to be able to speak up, to feel that they're not alone in their struggle. That's what it's about. And there are several players on this list for the Masterton this year that have been through some really difficult circumstances. And it's one of the things that hockey does right. For all of the griping you and I do about some of the stubbornness about clinging to old culture and old ideals and a certain way hockey players are supposed to be, something like this is cool. You want to highlight guys. You want to highlight the individuals who genuinely are putting everything they can into the game and improving themselves. You know, you talk about, I was scrolling through the list, TJ Oshie, who lost his father a couple of years ago, who's somebody who's dealt with chronic injuries and has very well. There are a number of guys on this list, like Sean Couturier, for example, who could have just walked away. They have the contract. They could have been LTIR'd. They could have been honorary members of the Arizona Coyotes, like Shea Weber, like Pavel Datsyuk, and rode off into the sunset, got their money. In some of these cases, maybe gotten their jersey retired with a certain organization or got put in a ring of honor, and that could have been it. But these guys wanted to come back and wanted to put it sounds silly to say, you know, play for their name, but in this case, a lot of these guys, that's what it comes down to.
Yeah, and they put, like, I don't know, I guess people will say, well, you know, they're millionaires, they're professional athletes, they should just be happy to do whatever. They're also human beings.
Yes.
First and foremost. And sometimes it's just hard. Like, I cannot imagine going through some of these things and then having to get on a plane to go on, you know, a 7-game road trip across the country while my family may be grieving or something, you know, those extenuating circumstances that I still have to deal with and push to the side while I play.
Yeah, and then, you know, there are some funny ones for, like, you know, Sid, Giroux, who are just old. You know, Sid's dealt with some, you know, Sid, the face of the mumps in the NHL, but that was, you know, that was at this point like a decade ago. But Sid, Giroux, guys who have just shown a dedication, Jonathan Quick, you know, guys who are just old and have played well. Yeah, all three of those guys, you know, were guys who played in the 2010 Olympics. We're talking about quite a while ago at this point, and still playing at a reasonably high level. Giroux having one of his best statistical seasons. I believe Giroux's 35 years old now. So Masterson's cool. And the one thing I will say on this topic, I feel like there's not a good way to do this award, because we're essentially turning this into a trauma contest, and whose story is the most compelling gets the most votes. And then there are years where somebody who's just old, like Jágr, wins it, as opposed to somebody who dealt with real extenuating and difficult circumstances. Like, I could be wrong about this, and I probably should have checked before I pulled it up, but I'm pretty sure the year Jágr won the Masterton just for being old was also the year Matt Zuccarello came back from a fractured skull, where he took that puck to the head in the playoffs in 2015, didn't play the rest of the postseason, and was a finalist, you know, one of the three people who went to the award, but he didn't end up winning the Masterton for that. So there's got to be there. I don't know what the right way to do it is. I'll be fair. I'll be honest. I don't know what the best way to do this is. Like, do you just... should we give a single trophy out, or should every team just nominate somebody and they all are recognized as a Masterton nominee, you know, because it feels unfair to pit these plights against each other, you know, like Marco Rossi, Oliver Kylington, they didn't know if they were ever going to play hockey again in both of their cases, in comparison to Sidney Crosby, who's just 36 and good at hockey. Yeah.
And like Matt Duchene's on that list too. And I was like, okay, so he got bought out and then signed with a contending team.
Same thing as OEL. Congrats. Same thing as Ekman Larson.
Like, congrats, I guess. And I understand everyone has to nominate, or they nominate everyone from a team, but some of these are silly. Like last year, it was Chris Tanev.
Yeah.
Because he's old.
He's old and he plays a certain style of hockey that endears him to the hockey men.
Yes. But this year, we have a feel-good story coming out of Calgary. And coming up next, we're going to talk about the exact opposite of feel-good. Or maybe it is a good feeling because you don't have to worry about the Flames in the postseason. And we will be back right after this. Did you know that even if you have a 401k for retirement, you can still have an IRA? Robinhood has the only IRA that gives you a 3% boost on every dollar you contribute when you subscribe to Robinhood Gold. But get this, now through April 30th, Robinhood is even boosting every single dollar you transfer in from other retirement accounts with a 3% match. Right now, no cap on the 3% match. Robinhood Gold gets you the most for your retirement thanks to their IRA with a 3% match. The offer is good through April 30th. Get started at robinhood.com/boost. Subscription fees apply. And now for some legal info. Claim as of Q1 2024 validated by Radius Global Market Research. Investing involves risk, including loss. Limitations apply to IRAs and 401ks. 3% match requires Robinhood Gold for 1 year from the date of the first 3% match. Must keep Robinhood IRA for 5 years. The 3% match on transfer is subject to specific terms and conditions. Robinhood IRA available to U.S. customers in good standing. Robinhood Financial, LLC, member SIPC, is a registered broker-dealer. Thank you, everyone, for hanging out with us on today's episode of Locked On Flames. Make sure you're subscribed because even though the Flames are eliminated, we're here for you 5 days a week through the middle of July. So you're going to want to hang out because it'll be lonely without Flames hockey.
We're going to make do. We're going to make do.
We always do. Last off season was 6 months without Flames hockey with no general manager, no coach, 7 free agents. Well, a slightly better position, I would say, this year.
Yes. Because they have a defined position. They have a direction.
Yeah. Yes, and that is the biggest thing they were lacking. Even up until a little bit before the trade deadline. They didn't know what they wanted to do.
Yeah, they wanted to have their cake and eat it too. They were trying to do both simultaneously, and the team's play forced their hand, and they ultimately made the right decision. It's going to be rough. I spend a lot of this week talking about how the Flames can kind of close the gap between them and the teams that are ahead of them. But that's assuming that's the goal. There's a real chance the Flames are very mediocre out of the gate next year. They don't get, the 7-0-3 February that buoyed them along and kept them in the playoff mix right up until the deadline. And they just stink out of the gate. There's a good chance they're out of the mix by Christmas. And at that point, then the conversation shifts to, okay, who on this team can we trade off again? And we keep slowly disassembling the roster, and that allows Conroy to kind of tweak where they're going. But as we've discussed ad nauseum, this is better than nothing. This is better than being in the purgatory they were in. You saw what this team at close to full health did last year. They finished 6 or 7 points back of the lowest point total to make the playoffs since 2012 last year. That group wasn't inspiring confidence. For the Flames to convince their owner, who refuses to admit there are problems with the organization, that, hey, this probably isn't going to work out, we should trade these guys. That is a real watershed moment.
Yeah, and I'm sure it took more than just a few simple phone calls to make that happen. And, for the Flames to finally be where they are in terms of draft positioning, this is what fans have wanted. They've wanted to obviously be better, but if they were going to stink enough to be considered for the draft lottery. And
you want to get to at least 10. You want to get to at least 10. That's the goal. And you're probably not going to be able to move up from 10 to 1. You can move up from 10 to 7. You can move up. Right now, I'm looking at Tankathon. They're sitting at 8. They have a 6% chance of picking first overall from the 8th slot. That's not nothing. And just because they don't pick first, if they move up to 3, if they move up to 4, the Flames haven't picked that high since they took Matthew Tkachuk. It's been a while. You're going to need to restock your cupboard eventually. And I know you'll get people who counterpoint and say, well, teams sometimes they'll get multiple guys who are picked in the top 5, but they didn't draft all of them. They traded for them. They got them in free agency. And yeah, that's fair. But the Flames are in a different situation. You have to be honest about their market. You have to be honest about their appeal. And you have to realize for the Flames to get an elite player, more likely than not, they're going to have to do it through the draft.
Yeah. And I've seen, over the last month or so, I've seen people post screenshots from years prior. And they'll talk about the difference between the 8th draft pick and the 6th draft pick. And sometimes it's a pretty big fall off. And I mean, obviously it depends on the draft class. That's a given. But is that something you want to risk? Or are you ready to use some of those draft picks that you've acquired and move up?
I think ultimately, if it were up to me and I were laying it all out, I don't think you're going to be able to trade up into the top 3 or the top 4 of a good draft. The teams that stink that are picking up there, like the Sharks, the Blackhawks, the Blue Jackets, those teams need guys just as badly as you do. It's not like football where certain positions go faster. It's not like football where at the end of the month, if Jaden Daniels is sitting there at 4, everybody is going to be banging down the Arizona Cardinals door trying to trade up to that spot. Or if the Patriots don't take a quarterback and one of the, if Jaden Daniels and JJ McCarthy are both sitting there at 4, the Giants, the Vikings, maybe the Broncos, the Raiders, it's a lot more, it's a lot easier to do that because certain positions in football are so much more valuable than others. In hockey, that same type of positional scarcity isn't the case. Even if someone's a center in junior and eventually you transition them to the wing because they're just not that good at faceoffs, or vice versa, you draft a wing, but you think you can teach them to win faceoffs. Eventually what's probably going to happen with Connor Bedard, where he'll eventually become a center once he gets a little bit bigger and gets better center faceoff technique. It's not the same. So you're probably not going to be able to trade up. You might be able to get more assets. The Flames, if they want, they can go to the Patriot School of Drafting where they pick 6. All right, let's trade to 10 and get an extra second in there. All right, we're picking 10th. All right, let's try and get down another few spots. There's 4 or 5 guys we like. Let's get extra mid-round picks and let's bundle all our mid-round picks. And then I think instead of trading up, I think the argument is you trade for a player. I think that's the argument.
Yeah.
You get all of these draft picks, and then when a disgruntled restricted free agent or a 1-year or 2-year UFA become available, that's when you push a bunch of mid-round picks into the middle.
And that's a fair way to go about it. I mean, we have been saying since this time last year, they don't want hostages. Nope. So if you can make the most in your exchange in these trades, why not do it? If you have something that is so attractive to other teams, like we've talked about, a Blake Coleman, a Mangiapane, please come calling. We won't answer, but someone will.
Hey man, the worst thing you can do is nothing. The Flames are heading in a direction. We don't know where that direction is going. It's like the episode of SpongeBob where he keeps asking Patrick for the heading. Yeah, we're heading west. The Flames are heading west right now. Yep.
And that compass is going to hopefully point them in a better direction because this is just the start of it. This isn't, they've declared a direction. They've decided to take a new route. But now let's see where that goes. And it's ultimately up to management and their scouting department. So maybe don't hold your breath. But coming up next, we are going to talk about Connor Zary and Martin Pospisil and just why and what's going on with them. But before we do that, I do want to take a quick break here and talk to you about eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber and not cash. With all the parts you need at prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. Thanks, everyone, for hanging out with us today on Locked On Flames. Make sure you're following us on Twitter at Jess Belmosto and at Nick Zararis. So, who do we want to start with? The healthy scratch or the menace?
I think Zary's the easier one to start with because it's pretty straightforward. The games don't particularly matter as far as the outcome, but establishing a culture, establishing an identity, that stuff matters. You know, that's what we've talked about a lot as far as the goal for the rest of these games. And it's some of this is performative. You know, this is a coach trying to send a message, trying to draw the
line.
Yeah, exactly. Ultimately, this probably doesn't matter a whole lot in the long-term trajectory of Connor Zary. He's exceeded all expectations for this season. He's had a nice season. I am tentatively penciling him into the top 6 for next year in my brain, and we'll go from there. This is silly. You know, this is the hockey men thinking of, well, he's taking it for granted that he's in the lineup. Okay, great. Who are you going to play instead of him? That's why it's silly.
Yeah. And Ryan Huska was asked about it post-game, and he was like, I don't give free games. And we're like, okay, good. Glad to see you're not immune to the hockey men mentality. But I feel like Huska has done a good job of I would say balancing, because I mean, there have been a lot of players that have come and gone, and there's been spots you need to fill, and he's worked pretty well with what he's got for the most part. But I mean, this isn't like he's being benched because he missed a team breakfast, he overslept, he didn't show up to a meeting or something like that. Like, it's not disciplinary, like, oh, this is a character issue. It's kind of, unfortunately, a rite of passage as a rookie.
Yeah, exactly. That's a good way to describe it. It's a rite of passage. It's a little bit silly. It's a little bit archaic. It's a little bit of Huska trying to say, well, I'm the adult here. I'm the one who's in charge, and we're going to do the thing. We're going to do things the way I want to do them. Is this silly? Yes. Are you always going to be better off playing a guy as opposed to sitting a guy? When it comes to a young guy, I would argue yes. I would argue you're not going to make as good of a point by sitting a guy when you have these games that are more or less a blank slate for your organization, where you should be experimenting. You should be allowing these guys to figure it out. But I can understand Huska saying, hey, these games don't really matter a whole lot. I got to do something to keep the group engaged. And I can't sit a veteran who makes a lot of money, because that wouldn't send the right message to the other veterans. So I can make an example of this kid making, an ELC, and we'll go from there. It's not the end of the world. Plenty of talented players get healthy bombed, but it's silly.
Yeah. And then on the other hand, you have one that might be facing a little bit more serious punishment, and that would be Martin Pospisil, because once again, he is taking dangerous shots at players.
It's frustrating, man. You want to root for the guy. You want him to be a contributing part of the team. He, like Zary, has exceeded expectations this season. And it's been encouraging that they were able to get stuff from him when they weren't expecting it. But at the same time, let's just be responsible here.
And the thing that drives me crazy is that he has had multiple concussions to the point where he has a tinted visor at 24 years old.
Yeah.
Do you not see what you're doing and how stupid that is?
It's frustrating, man. You just want to smack him on the back of the head and say, come on, what are we doing here? You know better than that.
And it's not even like I get height of, emotions. It's an emotional game, whatever. And not that that's an excuse, but this was just a because. And it shows a lack of discipline even after being suspended. And
it shows a lack of respect.
Yeah.
That's the biggest thing. I say this all the time when it comes to these types of hits, that even if they're not penalized, which Pospisil he was penalized for the hit, even if they're not penalized, it shows a fundamental lack of respect for your opponent to throw that type of hit. And I get constant pushback whenever I say that, because the people will say, well, guys know if they step on the ice, they're liable to get hit. Yeah, sure. But you can hit a guy in a responsible way that's not going to hurt them.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it feels cheap.
Exactly.
What do you get out of that other than more than likely injuring a player? You are getting tossed from the game, and maybe you hear from the Department of Player Safety.
Well, they got to spin the wheel at DOPS,
exactly.
And then what's his face, George Peros decides whether or not you get 5 games or you get the death penalty. It depends on the spin of the wheel.
Yeah, and then he has to ask the Magic 8 Ball if that's a fair punishment for what was done, and it usually isn't, but that's up to them, I guess. I just want to see less of that. Not just from him, but from everyone in the league.
It'd be nice. I would love for the game to be a little bit safer. I love hockey immensely. Mm-hmm. It is by far my favorite sport. I don't want to see guys get hurt over stupid stuff. Like, the Flame season is over. There is nothing to be gained by going out there and doing this other than the adrenaline rush of going out there and doing it.
I don't know. If he has the ability to think about walking into a Rolex store and walking out with a Rolex, he has the ability to put 2 and 2 together to not do that.
It'd be nice, man. I don't ask for a lot. I really don't when it comes to when it comes to players just being reasonable. I'm not saying you can't be physical. I'm not saying you can't fight. I'm saying make it worth it. That's supposed to be a component of the game that's supposed to have an added dimension to it. Just doing it for the sake of doing it defeats the purpose of it being in the game.
Right. You can throw big hits.
Yeah.
And have them be legal. We see it every game. And it's just, I get it. He's young. He's quote unquote learning. I feel like a suspension should have really reinforced that, but I'm not him. I can't. His frontal lobe isn't developed yet.
That's true.
Which is even worse for him, but we'll see what happens. As of now, I haven't heard anything. Would they have already made a decision on that?
They would have said if he was going to get a hearing or not. If it was, because if it's in person, it's like more than 5 games, that kind of thing. But I haven't seen anything either. So
maybe tomorrow he has to fork over some money or something. But
yeah, more likely than not, that would be my assumption.
But I think that does it for us today on Locked On Flames. Thank you all for hanging out with us and making Locked On Flames part of your day. You can listen to us wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube as well. We are available 5 days a week, Monday through Friday, your team every day. Nick, do you have any final words for us today?
Everyone enjoy your weekend.